Okay, I'm excited to introduce you today to Dr. Daniel Hochman, board certified psychiatrist, private practice clinician, and creator of the Self Recovery Program, which is recognized as one of the leading alternatives to AA, which is super interesting. His view is that addiction isn't a failure of willpower, but trained strategy to escape intolerable emotion, a cycle that spans everything from alcohol to food to social media. He gets why smart, high achieving women keep looping through these painful habits, no matter how many success logs or routines they follow. And we're just so excited to have your wisdom speaking over our community today because you have some answers woven in through what you can offer that, again, it can be, yes, alcohol, but you're coming in with a food piece for us today too. And I just needed our listeners to hear that there's going to be so much to absorb. Grab your pens and paper and take notes. Welcome, Dr. Hochman.
Yeah, thanks for the intro and thanks for having me.
Yes, I found a quote of yours, and I think this is going to be a great way to set this up for today. And then I have 1,000 questions for you. But you had said, I've always been fascinated about what actually causes human suffering to progress or continue. Self-recovery draws on your medical training as a physician. This is interesting, like it's spanning over the physician piece, the psychological piece, and then through thousands of research studies as well to this more holistic approach to addiction care and the care that actually works. So, can you unpack that for us and where your process, your journey has led you?
Yeah, what drives me in this space is figuring out how exactly we suffer because there are a lot of complications that people get confused by. So, for example, we can have a really hard day, we can have a really sad thing, and do we call that suffering or not? So, if you're running and you're getting really exhausted, your legs are tired, you could call that suffering, but is that really bad or not? So it starts to get interesting when we're trying to measure, is that bad for you or is that good for you? So the run, right, you could call that suffering, but it's good for you. So that needs to be qualified and differentiated from getting in a wreck in the morning. That would be bad. It's unwanted. It's not a voluntary choice, so it's an interference. So there's all these complications that I see throw people off. And so when I say suffering or intolerable emotion, it's not like a hard workout. It's usually the way people truly suffer are around things that are generally unwanted. But there are a lot of gradations between that and chosen things that are very difficult. So there's a lot more to say, but just to start to help people understand, suffering is, in my view, very misunderstood and poorly researched around what exactly makes us feel unwell.
Hmm, that's so interesting. Thank you. Yes, for differentiating that. And this, again, is bringing you into this space. What did you say with this? Again, like, how does this start to weave in with addiction care, recovery? How do you start looping all of your experiences that got you here?
Yeah, so what has largely remained unanswered in the research and clinical care around addiction is what exactly causes it. We actually do have very well established research on some of that. So we do know that, for instance, a lack of belonging leads to addiction, really poor ability to tolerate stress. So we have some very good clues. But what I like to frame for people, if we go to what I and many good people in this field will say is addiction is a surface level behavior for something that's underlying. So there's some underlying issue. It could be depression, anxiety, just a lot of stress, emptiness, resentment. So we can have all these underlying feelings, and then that leads to an addiction. But it's important for me to describe that. So I'm a psychiatrist, and I have a lot of people who are quote unquote only depressed or only anxious. But why don't those people all have an addiction then? So I like to help people understand and frame that having some underlying emotional distress is not some automatic pathway to addiction. The key feature in addiction is that that's not tolerated. So, someone, say, with depression who can tolerate that sadness does not have addiction. But if you can't tolerate that internal experience, it turns into addiction.
Hmm. Thank you. That's really interesting. I think everyone listening is going, oh, I get that. I can see how that's playing out, whether it's in our own life or you can see it playing out in somebody else's. So I think that's clutch to understand that, honestly. And you do mention this escape from intolerable emotion, again, is where this addiction happened. A lot of people feel like it's a lack of willpower. I know what to do, I'm just not doing it. I suck. I can't do what I set out to do. I lack willpower, which we know that that's not it. So, out of curiosity, when you think about applying this, whether it's alcohol or food, what are we really lacking if it's not willpower?
Yeah, in one word, the tolerance. So that a tolerance for a negative internal state. So if you can tolerate that state, then you do not turn to vices. And so also for people listening, I've been saying addiction. We also just mean turning to any vices. So this can be heading to the pantry for some bad stuff, opening up the freezer for not a pint of vodka, but a pint of ice cream would be much better. So yeah, we're just talking about turning to things to regulate our internal experience. So in one word, it's the tolerance, but I'll just quickly walk you through what your head should say now. If you can tolerate an internally bad state, well, that's not a very good goal to only tolerate it, right? We want to not have to be in that bad state to tolerate. So a good approach, or if it's a treatment, if someone's coming into formal treatment, ought to take care of the underlying issue as well. But having said that, there's a lot of things we go through in life and there isn't really a treatment for. So it could be like grief over losing a loved one. It could just be finances are really tight. There aren't always easy answers. And so there is a lot of life we just have to put up with. And so that might leave us just in tolerance mode for some of those things. And then there's other things we can emotionally process or we can take care of in our life and actually change our course. So there are different kinds of approaches depending on the nature of someone's suffering.
Mhm. With the first piece of that, does that go back into almost this like radical acceptance type thinking of like, I really can't change my circumstance? How am I then supposed to sit in that discomfort if I can't change it, if it's heart-wrenching to me? What are some of those next steps that you guide a patient down?
Yeah, so there's a lot of different phases to that. And so the way I approach it is to start with where the patient is, which is usually going to be just starting at that surface. So we may, for example, if you're reaching for things in the pantry and it's like Snicker bars, we want to start to just transfer that to something a bit healthier. So it could be like chocolate only, or it could advance to chocolate covered nuts. And so the first thing is just slowing, I call the current of addiction because it feels like you're being swept
Hmm.
and brought all the way to the bad stuff at the end of the current. And it's this current because it's like a build up and it's hard to stop it. And we've got all this inertia. So what we want to do is still allow ourselves to be in that current, but just try and steer it a little bit at the end. So we're not actually trying to stop totally or fight the vice or addiction entirely. We're just trying to steer it. So that's the first thing we do. And then once that's established, we go back up a little bit and there's usually a lot of mindfulness or grounding techniques that we can do so that you interrupt some of those episodes. So instead of it's 10 out of 10 bags of chips or Snickers, we want to reduce it to like an 8 out of 10 times. And so two of those times out of the 10 might be a little easier to ground yourself and get through. And so that could be breathing work, that could be sensory work, and that can be all sorts of things. That can be guided imagery, that could be touch, it could be different scents or smells. It can even be like riddles and cognitive distractions. So there's all kinds of grounding and sensory techniques we can use to interrupt that final stretch there where we actually partake in the vice. And so you see, we're backing up a little bit. That's not going to work every time, but we just want it to work some of the time. And then backing up from there, we're in that cravings phase, which a craving is really just the mind's attempt to find some way out of our emotional distress. Okay, so when we're in that phase, what we're doing is slowing the current by trying to tolerate that want. And so the mind might come up with the idea that I want a Snickers now. It's been a hard day, or I'm in a bad situation, marriage, family issues. And so we want to build that muscle where we can tolerate this wave. And so this is called urge surfing. It's a known phrasing for really
Mm-hmm.
powerful technique. It sort of embraces Eastern and like mindfulness work, but it's been modernized into a packaged form. And that's where we basically understand and anticipate that urges are going to come up and we ride through those. And so I want, and we try and sit there, breathe through it, and tolerate that experience. And it will always go up to a peak, and it will actually always pass. And much like the other parts I was saying, we don't have to do this 10 out of 10 times. We can do it, and it will work on some of those times. And so getting to where you can do that some of the times gets you on the other side, and you can start to build on that and do more and more. And so if you notice, we're doing all these different phases. Now, the origin of the current is going to be some underlying distress. So it could be a clinically diagnosed depression, anxiety, PTSD, terrible trauma, feeling very lonely, bad marriage, upset with your career, grief over family issues. It could be anything. A lot of boredom or emptiness happens for people there too. So it's not diagnosable mental illness necessarily. And that's the underlying distress that ultimately needs to be treated or just addressed individually. But I usually do that last because that's the longer, harder work. And some people, frankly, aren't willing to do that, and especially people I don't get to treat one-on-one. So, as far as this kind of messaging, a lot of people just don't ever go there. But there are plenty of those things you can do for the other parts of that current that can actually totally end addiction or vices. You would still just be left with some distress. And if it's bad enough, people will naturally want to do something about it.
Right. Yes, I love the working backwards because I talk a lot about lowest hanging fruits or how you describe this first and foremost to just steer it in a different direction feels very comfy. It feels attainable. It feels like, hey, you don't have to do this overhaul right now. What's the next step that feels? It's kind of when I think about when somebody's like, don't take away my Diet Coke. It's like, we don't have to even talk about Diet Coke. We can talk about adding in more fruit. How's that sound? That's the kind of comfiness I just got listening to you walk through these phases. And it's when they feel more and more comfortable, they can keep getting through these next phases because this takes work. And so, one of my questions for you was, I think one of the things that pops up as we're doing this kind of work is, do I even care? When we are in the moment and we are looking at the work ahead of us, our brain is really good about telling us, does it even matter? Do I even care? What's some of the work you do around training in the moment to stay in the moment of, I do care, my future self cares. So how do I keep working the program here?
Yeah, lots of different approaches to that. And I hope I can say, or you can bleep it out, but I call it the fuck it moment, right? That's when the dam breaks.
Yeah.
So in my current, right, we have underlying distress, craving, right? The mind comes up with a way out. And then the addiction part of the current is just one sliver of it, where we actually carry that out. At the moment that we cross from the craving, or let's even forget that terminology, but just you want it so badly and you get a little preoccupied with it. The moment it switches from just a want cognitively and emotionally, but as a cognitive idea, switches to the actual partaking outwardly, like behaviorally, to grab and open or eat the thing or drink. You're thinking of the wine bottle and you actually now are pouring a glass. That's the moment that you're saying "Fuck it" in your head.
Mhm.
It may be explicitly something you follow in your head where you're saying, but even if not, at least it's implied that that is the very moment you're saying "Fuck it." That's a moment that when we build up enough muscle and reps, we can breathe through those and get through that. For most people, that's why I say, like, that's not going to be attainable right at the start because the current and why I call it that is there's already so much force leading up to it. So there's a lot of approaches, but one of the first things to note about it is I generally wouldn't think about putting all your effort into just trying to hold the dam there. And
Mhm.
when you're saying "Fuck it," like somehow just not partake in that outward addiction, that's too difficult. It's a setup for not having the preparation, the mindset, the will, the force, the patience to get through that moment. So, like anything in life, most of it is in the preparation, but we also want to have the right framing so that knowing that we are going to screw up so much of the time, that's why we want to transfer. So, when we get to that moment, have some alternative already decided or planned and in place. So you have a menu of options. And maybe with the case of food, it's literally a menu. And so it's not Snickers, but it's just some chocolate covered almonds. So when we reach the moment, we have some other things to do. Because when we're in that moment, there's not really the patience to be making rational choice. And a lot of people really beat up on themselves because they imagine that that's a space for rational choice and that they're just then being stupid, weak. And that's such a foolish, narrow focus on that one little space. So, where you want to apply effort is upstream. You want to apply the effort in all of the setup. So, doing the work on the feelings, doing the work on the tolerating, on the grounding or distracting techniques. So, do the work in areas that are amenable to work. But there's not really work to do on just, I'm going to will myself not to do this thing. That's a terrible placement of time and energy.
Oh, this is so good. Yes. Okay. So I want to come back to that opportunity of a shame moment that you were just talking about, the shame, the guilt piece that comes. And I love that you were like, this is not even your time to do that. So I want to dig a little deeper there. Because in my mind, if we go to a really generic example of that, it'd be the person who is trying to get themselves up and workout clothes on, dressed, and out the door to do the workout, right? So the walk happens later that day. That what I'm hearing out of you is, if you want to bring in that moment of why did I do that and why didn't I, it should be more in like, why didn't I put on the shoes if you want to beat yourself up? That's the prep stuff versus the people beat themselves up or find shame in, I didn't get the workout done. Am I hearing that correctly?
Yeah, exactly. If we're using that example with the workout, it's like, shoot, I didn't go to sleep when I should have last night. So like the
Yes.
setup was terrible. Or oh my God, my plans did not really leave enough time for this. Or I knew this was going to be like a long, hard day. Of course, I wasn't going to be able to work out. So you need to set up like that time structure, get enough sleep. Your diet, of course, needs to be conducive to working out. Like you said, yeah, maybe you've already picked out your outfit if that's something you struggle with, body image, or you already know like what you're going to do for your workout. Is it going to be sprints? Is it inside? Is it at a gym? That needs to be decided. You can't give yourself a whole lot of work to do when you meet that moment of am I going to do this or not? You have to have so many things going in your favor already. And so I want to really point out too, because I see people make this mistake all the time. They continue to frame it in their heads then that I'm weak or I don't have the willpower to go work out. I will say willpower is a vague nothing term. So it's not like I can create the willpower to go work out or willpower to not drink. That's not a real thing. I'm okay with people calling it that. It's just you have to understand that's shorthand and that's abstract for a whole set of things emotionally, psychologically, and cognitively that have to come together to actually do something. So we don't just will ourselves to do anything. It's the culmination. It's called an emergent property. That's a term they use in physics, but we're starting to use more now in the emotional space too, like happiness. It's an emergent behavior to follow through and do something, but it's the culmination of a lot of parts. And people then misattribute. They say, I don't have willpower, I must not care, or this is self-sabotage. And they're mischaracterizing that moment instead of breaking it down into its parts and understanding, like you had said, you got to go to bed on time, you got to eat right, you got to have these things lined up to have a chance.
Mhm. Which comes back to the systems type talk. Like you're giving examples of you have to have good systems in place and then you fall back on your systems. Let's stay in that. Can you talk about the shame piece, the detriment of if somebody is stuck in shame, self-sabotage, guilt, give the warning, why should they care?
Why should they care? Like, why should they try harder? Like
Or
why should
understand
I
it
not just
more?
give up?
Like if we have a client or a listener going, "Oh, I'm terrible about beating myself up in that moment," but I do it. Somebody can tell me
Hmm.
all the consequences, and I still show up to the moment, and I still show up with the same self-talk. What happens if that self-talk doesn't change?
To expand on the self-talk, so there's two very strong approaches that I like to teach around this. One, if we're extending where you're going with this with self-talk, is to have an actual dialogue if it's going to be self-talk. So self-talk should not be dictatorial, where you just tell yourself you're bad, you're stupid, you're weak, whatever the bad shaming talk is. You can call that self-talk, but what it needs to progress to is an actual internal conversation or dialogue. Okay, so now imagine two people. Of course, we're talking about, voices in our own head, but imagine two people. If you were out with your friend and they didn't order the right thing, they ordered the unhealthy meal, you wouldn't want to just scream at them. You ordered the wrong thing. You stupid. Don't you see you're already overweight? Don't you care? You wouldn't just scream at them and walk away. If you were doing it lovingly and trying to help, and you probably might not comment anyway, but just go with this.
Play along.
You'd ask them what's going on. You'd try and see how they're feeling or be there for them. So that would be a true dialogue. So if we're having that dialogue in our head, we want to use a very calm tone and one of curiosity. So what that means is, hey, me, why did I not work out today? Like I knew I wanted to, I did make the time, and I still just didn't do it. So we're actually genuinely wondering for ourselves, why did I not do that? But not then leave it at that. Otherwise, that's sort of gaslighting. So the other part has to be able to be given the space to have a real answer. And it can be a real answer to say, man, I just really am feeling down. It's hard for me to put the cart before the horse. I'm feeling sluggish. I'm not happy with my life right now. And so I don't even know why I should do this. And then we have to breathe through that and have the rest of the dialogue that the other part now says, hey, I'm really sorry. I know it's been a rough stretch here. You're feeling alone, this and that. No one's going to even notice if you lose weight anyway. But hey, what if we just do this for us? And so on, right? And there's a million examples of what we can do with this. And if it's drinking, same thing. So we want to have an actual dialogue. So if you're having negative self-talk and shaming, I'm actually okay with when we point things out to ourselves that are going wrong. That's actually really important. We have to be accountable to the truth of our life. So I don't ever actually steer my patients away from negative self-talk. It's just that we have to change the tone, and it has to be a real conversation where there's actual openness to hearing internally what are we actually going through, so that you get to actually discover, oh, wait, I'm really sad about this thing, or oh man, like I'm really scared about this thing coming up. And so we have to go through that experience.
Do you have a belief system at all? And I'm kind of asking this tongue in cheek that somebody is not doing something because they're just not capable of it or they're lazy or they don't care.
Yeah,
Do you
those are
always,
those are
yeah.
all very, very sloppy shorthand words. That's why, like, if we say they don't have willpower, they don't care, those are all very sloppy words that don't mean anything. Yeah, or to say you're unmotivated. Again, it's not that I'm trying to just be polite to people. It's just that those are too vague and shorthand. It's like saying that's a bad person. There might be a lot of really bad things they do, so we're not trying to skirt around some truths. But you can't just say that's a bad person. I've treated plenty of criminals, and they sometimes do much nicer things than I would do. They might really go out of their way to help certain people, shirt off their back. Often the things they're doing in their mind, they're vehemently defending someone or something. So we can still say they do really bad things and we need to lock them up, but they're not like a bad person. That's a super sloppy word to use. So yeah, to say unmotivated, lazy, those are just sloppy, and that's where the internal dialogue helps to say, if you're shaming yourself, it's saying, "Oh, you stupid, lazy pieces." Say the other part needs to say, "Okay, you're right. I don't do a lot of things, and I'm not going to just prop myself up. I'm even compared to people who are overweight or this, I still am not doing enough for myself." That's a good truth, but follow it through calmly. What do you mean by lazy? And when you break that down into its smaller parts, that's when you can actually get somewhere. And the other part you'd asked about shame, the other strategy, there's plenty. There's another one really good to highlight is when we are calling ourselves in some sort of way a failure, I call it a technical failure to just set the right tone because if I failed and I had too much to drink tonight, I'm okay calling that a failure, but just it's a technical failure. And like you're picking up on with me, my system failed. And so I screwed up. It was a technical failure. I had way too much to drink again tonight. But we need to just leave it at that technical system level thinking, is that I failed in this particular way. That's a terrible leap to now say I am a failure. Just like I said, with it's not like I am bad, I am lazy. You need to be really particular around exactly what you mean, in under what condition, and exactly in which way you screwed up, you're lazy, you're a failure.
Right, because those little words differences, they make all the difference. It's interesting. I have a client who's always like, "Oh, Lindsey, you're always just messing with words. Like, it's still saying the same thing." I'm like, "It's not. It makes a difference." I wanted to just re-highlight because I really hope our listeners are catching this. Like you are honing in on something that's just so incredibly important. But this whole idea that if somebody is feeling unmotivated or lazy or not, we are tying this back to there is a underlying root cause, something that is going on that whether you have wanted to pull back any of those onion layers or not, but like you have some investigating to do is where I go with this. And I love introducing our crowd to someone like you who's like, hey, you know what? I even have a program. I have a way to think through this, which I feel like you were starting to give us some of your details here. But can you walk us through if someone's listening and goes, I would like more of Dr. Hochman? Like, I think he's onto something that would really work for me. What are next steps there?
Yeah, that's why I offer the program. It's at selfrecovery.org. And what it does is provide a very holistic, complete approach to all of this. So people use it for alcohol, food, any kind of vice. So it doesn't have to be a totally overt, terrible addiction. And just people who recognize that they're turning to things to regulate their internal state. And so for people that really want to take action, yeah, it walks through this current that I talked about. So underlying emotional distress, craving, the outward habit or vice. And then we also address the last part, which is a false pleasure. So we look at different philosophies on what we're even trying to reach when we do these things. Of course, false pleasures are bad for us, so we steer towards healthier pleasures and define what that means. And we also teach in there what life is then outside of that. A lot of people who struggle with vices actually have not really built yet what their life would look like, or they don't really understand what it would mean to take those away. Like if I don't have these pleasures or I don't feel pleasant today, then what am I trying to do? And so I also teach for how to live a life outside of that current in a way that's meaningful. And life is not just about more immediate pleasures. So it walks through all of these very completely and addresses all these different things, ranging from mindfulness techniques to dealing with childhood trauma. So there's really no way to go through the program and miss the way that you struggle personally. So that's what it's meant to do. It's video recordings of me. There's exercises. There's a mindfulness series in there. There's music to kind of draw out the emotional connection to these things. And there's forums in there. There are included groups as well. They're not mandatory. You can still stay anonymous and not have to get checked on or have groups. So it's meant to be very easy to access, and anybody that wants to work through that, it is a very complete guide to changing.
I think this is so important because there's this piece where it's like if we don't have a curated resource system around us. And I just picture people using your system, your course to sit and just plug you into their ears day in, day out until it starts to feel more like, okay, I get this. It's real. This could work for me. Because I think so many of us show up to something, maybe it's a one-time podcast, and then it's like, I'm so motivated. And then we walk away and forget about it within the next hour.
Mhm.
And this is where I really feel like this coursework and having the videos available to us. Put in your AirPods and listen often so that it can't just come and go. Like Is that part of the reason why you built something like this? I mean, obviously you're only one person and you can reach thousands by doing a course, but what are some of your beliefs around having all these different in-person, online ways to connect with people?
Yeah, exactly. There's a real failure of the industry because what people consider the gold standard to go away to rehab. So you're gone for 30 days. Sometimes they want you there 90 days, come back healed. That just doesn't match how, like all the science we know of how people change. So we want to change very slowly and methodically in our natural environment. So when we go away and change, it's very hard to bring those back home to real life because we've got ourselves right back in the same situation that we weren't able to tolerate before. So we want to make incremental gains slowly and over a longer period of time. So yeah, exactly. Having an online format is not just a gimmick just so that it's convenient. It's actually the right way to make a change is just these small little doses over time. So not only is it something someone can work into their life, not have to leave their job or family responsibilities, so they can do it in these small doses at their own leisure. One thing it means is we can be very private. Something that I respect is most people don't want to come into my office to work on life problems. That's a big barrier. It's definitely under 1 in 10. It's hard to nail down the exact number of people who need treatment actually ever arrive, even their first encounter of care. And so clearly most people who need help aren't coming into formal treatment. So one thing is it lets people be private about their internal life and keep it that way. And I like to respect and honor that most people do want to do it that way. If it's private and we can work through our demons and our own embarrassments that way, we're much more likely then to bring ourselves fully to that because we don't need to secondarily manage how someone is hearing us and the shame or embarrassment of that. So we're actually sometimes able to do much better work privately and anonymously. And then the other thing that it lets you do is do it at the right times for you. So there might be times, like if you signed up for some kind of like outpatient program, whether it's scheduled visits like with me or groups where they're like 3 evenings a week, you're counting on being in the right headspace when you go there, but that doesn't always happen. We're feeling either stressed or too tired or this and that. So being online and on demand lets you meet that at the right time when you're in the right headspace to take certain knowledge in and really soak that up. And then the other nice thing is it lets you go back to certain lessons. So you might go through, say, a trauma sequence of the course, and then you go through and you're doing other health parts of self-recovery. And then you might want to revisit the trauma part. So if you go away to rehab, it's hard to recapture certain moments. They're gone once you finish that experience. So it lets you revisit things. It lets you pull in a partner or a loved one to help explain something you've had a hard time putting into words. So you can say, hey, this lesson really resonated for me and it captures what I was trying to tell you. Would you mind coming and joining? I just want to hit play and have you listen to this part. And then there's other things too. It lets you also connect and you go through these exercises after each lesson. So being able to incorporate that on your own time and privately. So there's a bunch of reasons that being online, we leverage that. So I actually like contracted an educational design person to make sure that the program really is actionable and not just teaching and didactic to where it's just like knowledge but hard to transfer.
You can tell, honestly, like even the way you speak about things, you can tell there's the knowledge-based piece, but then there's the action piece. And I think it's just, again, it's so comfy to know and hopeful to know that there's something out there that we can get our hands on. Thank you. Oh my goodness. So I will put everything in the show notes for our listeners. I will also say I like to wrap up with this thought of, okay, this is a lot of info today. If somebody walked away just for today and heard nothing else, like if you were to wrap your arms around our listeners, what would be the one takeaway if you heard nothing else, hear this?
I liked the shame piece that you were zeroing in on. If you're struggling and you notice that you're beating yourself up, which is usually the case, I do invite you to take a second, try and reorient that so that you're having a true internal dialogue with yourself and really hearing the fuller story. Don't gaslight yourself.
Yes, I'm loving this. I'm taking that away. That's my takeaway. I'm going to continue using that with clients. So thank you. Thank you. You've been such a delight to have, so informative, and I hope you rejoin us sometime.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, Lindsay, for having me. This was a lot of fun.